Well, Fran and Mo, thank you so much for taking some time today. I know your schedules are incredibly busy, but your thoughtfulness, your thought leadership are so important. Your lived experience and how you've been able to be an influence, I think is going to make a significant difference in those learning today to be able to capture some of those experiences. So why don't I just allow both of you to introduce yourself, first and foremost, your organization, and how you've been able to enable leaders for better impact. And we'll start there and then dive deeper as we go.
I'm Monique Cadle. I am the founding partner of Goodworks Consulting. I've spent my whole career partnering with CEOs, CHROs, executive leaders around talent strategy, diversity, equity, inclusion work, organizational development work. And my beloved partner here, we started the commercial practice of diversity and inclusion, which was the term at the time at Deloitte. And so we decided to go off on our own and do this in a way that's very heart-centered. Before Goodworks, I led the people and HR strategy at a early cancer detection company called Delphi Diagnostics. And we've worked with hundreds of Fortune 500 startups, federal agencies, really trying to drive leadership development, inclusive culture, and sustainable business growth, which is needed now more than ever. So I'm really excited about the talk. Just in terms of just what I consider really special about us is I hope as you all hear us talk through how we're thinking about the world and thinking about the work that we need to be up to in organizations, that you hear an organization that is very heart-centered, data-driven, and really invested in ensuring that the people strategy is really aligned with what the business needs in terms of corporate priorities and mission achievement. So it is lovely, lovely, lovely to be here, Robert, and can't wait to talk. And I'll pass it to my business partner, Fran Benjamin.
Hi, folks. I'm Fran Benjamin. I am the managing partner of Goodworks Consulting. At Goodworks, I specialize in leadership development and organizational development. All of that, though, is underpinned by equity, diversity, and inclusion. It's a lens through which we do our HR strategy work, our organizational development work, our leadership development and training work. Prior to Goodworks, I was the SVP of Human Resources for 4D Molecular Therapeutics, and prior to that, Vice President of People at a company called Grail, where I had the privilege of seeing 4x growth over my time there, an IPO acquisition, and then more recently, after my departure, they subsequently IPO'd again as an independent organization. So I have sat in the seats of many of the listeners, I imagine, in terms of representing the executive team from an HR standpoint with the board of directors and compensation committees. But I also have had this lens of inclusion in my work for my whole 20-year career. So prior to that, was the chief of staff for Deloitte University's Leadership Center for Inclusion, a think tank at the intersection of both leadership, leading practice leadership, and inclusion, and the importance of bridging those two things together. Myriad of other things before that. But it's so good to be with you all. I'm zooming in from the sunny city of Minneapolis on March 13th.
Fantastic. Well, given both of your backgrounds, I think diving into this topic, when we look at from values to value, overcoming worldwide instability, I think, we've got 45, 50 minutes. We could probably go weeks and weeks on this. So we're going to have to synthesize this down, but I'm really excited to hear from both of you. When you look at the market and what's happening today, as we just talked before we started recording, the only thing constant is change, obviously, is something we've heard, but we've never seen a rapid state of change like this. And the socioeconomic impact and climate right now is something that is leaving people vulnerable. They don't know what to do. What are the employer expectations of the employee?
Yeah.
And how does that affect the realities of the business and the outcomes? And especially when you're looking at what an organization is responsible for in their HR department is keeping things on track with regards to their profitability and keeping employees engaged. So what is your experience with regards to navigating this? I.e., we've been through instability before, but we've never seen it like this. How should an employer deal with this rapid state of change?
I think everything starts and ends with leadership. Everything, in organizations at least. The tone and tenor of my experience of work from the employee's standpoint has everything to do with how you've kind of designed your home. You invited me to your house. I open the door, I come in, and how you spread the food, the temperature in the home, the warmth you give or don't give in the house gives me everything I need to know as a guest in this home. And I think about employees in the same way. Your leadership team is responsible for creating an experience for their employees. I think that it's a privilege to sit in a leadership seat. And it's particularly important in this time, for us to acknowledge some things that we know are just true about the culture that we're living in, whether or not we're at work. This is one of the most isolated feelings. They say we're a lonely group of people in this particular moment in time. We are the most polarized politically than we've ever been. There is economic instability. We're not doing well. Employees are not doing well, and leaders are still employees in some ways. No one is doing well. And so for me, I think I look at the privilege of leadership as the really important unlock of how are you creating space so people, despite chaos, despite the loneliness that they could be experiencing outside, despite the volatility, your home is safe. Your home feels safe. And so for me, it's about how do you create leadership strategies, both in terms of sustaining the business, future-proofing the business. So there's all of the kind of operational elements that you want to support leaders in, organizational design, process and procedures, policies that kind of create that sense of safety. But frankly, it's also about developing the leaders as human beings. How do we focus on our locus of control when there is chaos happening? Well, some of this is in our control. And how do we treat the things in our control really deliberately? How I think, what I measure, how I behave, the things that I incentivize and disincentivize in the organization. That's how you create an experience for your employees. So what I would say to this is, it is chaotic. It will continue to be chaotic. Expect this. Buckle up, everybody. And that doesn't mean that we don't really get laser focused on, okay, this is our organization. It's ours. I get to make what I want of this if you can align the leadership team to a vision of what we want for ourselves. So it's very easy to look outside and say, this is a mess. It is. And we have some control here. Let's get really clear on what we can control and create an experience that helps us retain, grow, recruit, develop the best. And we'll get into some of that in a bit. But Fran, anything you would add there?
Well, something that you said made me think of something, which was there was this interesting study conducted by McKinsey after the 2008 financial crisis that found that firms that had continued to invest intentionally in leadership development and talent development, but you're talking about leaders, Mo, and I think that this is an important piece. They rebounded from that financial crisis twice. I think it's something like twice as fast as other firms. And so for me, this moment is about groundedness as leaders. That's our leadership remit. How do we stay present to ourselves so we can be present to our employees? And the way that we go about that is with intentional investment. Now, I understand that the financial environment impacts that. And we have plenty of clients whose budgets are being adjusted in the current context. And so therefore, for me, that groundedness is about continued investment in scalable, sustainable solutions, so that the effect of transformation through this period sets the organization up to be even better on the other side of it. It reminds me a little bit of, when we were in the height of the pandemic as well. We were working with organizations to consider what is their work from home approach? What is their work from home culture? Or return to office? What is their return to office approach? What is their return to office culture, or something in between? And I would just say anecdotally that in our experience, the organizations that looked at those challenges as an opportunity to invest in leadership. So rather than just like, what is our policy about how often you have to be online, but how do we use this inflection point to help our managers understand what it's like to ensure accountability as a leadership behavior, to listen to the employee voice and perspective as a leadership behavior. The clients of ours that invested in those inflection points, these challenges as a leadership opportunity to upskill leaders, I think did much, much better than those that saw it as a transactional, how do we get the work done as quickly as possible.
Can I say two things to Fran's point?
Yeah, please.
And
go
just
ahead.
to kind of like give a very specific example, just drawing it to something really like rubber hits the road. During the pandemic, one of the things that obviously we struggled with was how do you get people to work when they're at home? There were a lot of leaders who were super uncomfortable with the idea that I cannot physically see you. I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
There were two really interesting behaviors that came out of leaders in that moment. Some leaders, really worried, lack of trust, went kind of command and control, a lot of micromanaging there, and various outcomes from that. And then to get to Fran's point, there were leaders who saw this as an opportunity, despite the chaos of it, which was to say, when I can't be in front of you, and we don't get the water cooler stuff, and I can't just pop into your office, I have to over-articulate what I need from you. I have to over-articulate accountability. We don't have the convenience of the things we had anymore. So what does that then invite us to be a part of? That's a really, really important thing for us to kind of translate to this moment. This is wild. Where are the opportunities here? The second thing I would say is to Fran's point around, I imagine there are some folks here who are looking at their bag of cash reserves left in their budget, and they're asking themselves, what do I need to invest in? And it is very easy for folks to say, I'm going to go for survival mode, and maybe the leadership development is a luxury good. Learning and development is a luxury good. But then this is where I think this conversation about AI actually is really, really important to pull into the conversation. AI, in part, I see a lot of possibility with, despite Fran knows this, I'm not a tech person. I don't enjoy it. I'm young, but not that young. I am learning. But the benefits of AI, in my mind, is it's going to improve my hiring efficiency, and it's going to help me look at the operations of the business and say, where do I reduce cost? Good, great. So now I'm going to look at the kind of predictive analytics that help me understand who's at risk in my organization. Where does HR need to proactively address an issue? What does career development look like? There are tools, and we can talk about these tools, that really help you. And they say that these are what the numbers say, up to 40% cost reduction if you're really strategic about how do you use AI in workforce planning, hiring, onboarding. So I'm going to say, if we believe that to be true, then let's be really intentional about how we use AI to relieve your talent organization, to relieve your leaders from some of the heavy lifting that felt really resource intensive. And then where are you freeing up now? Now we free up the thing we really need, which is human critical thinking that cannot be replaced by AI. You now replace that with connection. AI is not that. we need to be connected to people, human to human, real base, go back to the basics, treat people as you want to be treated kind of stuff. But AI is going to be a part of giving us that space so we can now pivot to what needs the most attention.
Well, I think, as you said, it's an opportunity. It's how we look at it. You know, when we look at what happened in COVID, we can fall prey to the command and control, or we can look at it as an opportunity to how do I address the change, the elephant in the room that's in front of me to get better outcomes. And this is the new norm. We're talking about before, everybody is vulnerable. Everybody's trying to figure it out. Nobody has the answers. Let me ask you both, maybe you could provide a real life experience when you talk about how did you operationalize this? How did you impact an organization with a similar framework with the disruption? So that, you know, the people who are listening can really see through the lens of ideation, help get to outcomes through disruptive change.
I have a couple of examples that come to mind.
Right.
So, you know, one of which is the example of a global life sciences company that was affected by a down economy that we were working with. And so the question, the sort of two design factors, let's say, that were with us as we began our engagement with them were, one, this notion of grounded leadership that I mentioned earlier. How do our leaders stay grounded and present to be available to our employee base and to stay focused on their strategic objectives for the company? And then the second sort of design criteria, so to speak, is scalability. How do we make the most of our interventions from a human resources standpoint by scaling them and gaining efficiency? So on this first point about leadership groundedness, one of the interventions that we worked with this organization to install was a leadership development experience that was specifically looking at catering to a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous moment in time. So it wasn't any unique off-the-shelf leadership development experience, but what is the role of a leader during, I'll use the acronym VUCA, a VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous moment, to be present to the business objectives and to their people. Now, you might say like, oh, wow, this organization was investing in a leadership program in a down economy. Tell me more about that. How is that possible? And that leads me to the second point, which is scalability. So what I'll say is that as HR leaders, what you knew to be true from the science of organizations that you all have studied over your careers, what you knew to be true 9 months ago is still true today in terms of what works. So don't let the sociopolitical rhetoric throw you from your game. Don't let your CEOs doubt about your investment deter you from continuing to give voice to what works. And so we had this opportunity with this partner to take that experience and scale because the CHRO knew that this intervention was going to help sustain them through this volatility. And so the scalability for them looked like conducting that leadership in a program in a way that was catered to multiple audiences at once. So you can take something and leverage it in a cascade manner throughout your organization using both synchronous and asynchronous leadership development experiences so that you're not replicating unique things across the organization, so that what the walk the talk that the leaders are doing is the same walk the talk that the managers are doing, and then the employee relevant piece of that gets cascaded as well. And one of the ways that we designed this hand in hand with them was for this lens of efficiency. So how do we do this in a way that does not balloon costs, but we're leveraging the great work that we're doing for one group? The other thing on scalability with this client that comes to mind is wellness. So with this client, we partnered with them to design a well-being offering or a benefits offering that was, and this is not new to many of you, but that was a kind of choose your own adventure well-being offering. So no change in dollar investment to the benefits and wellness offering, but employees got to pick and choose what was most relevant to them. And again, that's another one where we saw in COVID-19 that became critically important, that wellness, whether it was elder care for some folks, that's relevant for some folks and not for others, whether it was emergency child care for some folks, that was relevant for some folks and not for others, whether it was meditation and the gym or what have you, using those dollars to place them in the buckets that worked best for each employee enabled them to have scalability of their wellness offering. And then the last thing that comes to mind for me for this organization in particular is the notion of sort of utilization paired with talent development. So this organization had the opportunity to enable stretch assignments cross-functionally and internal mobility on special assignment to maximize the utilization, so to speak, and I hate to be crass with that word, of their employee population in a down economy. So if I, Fran, have 85%, if I'm at 85% capacity, I've got 15% to spare. Is that being utilized within my function? If not, maybe I can take on a new assignment, develop my resume, develop my skill set, get exposure to something new and different because, frankly, at this moment, I'm sitting at home on my computer by myself. And that this organization was therefore able to leverage the capacity of its workforce across the workforce versus necessarily needing to add additional headcount and things like that. So that's one example that I think was really powerful because it had these two design criteria of leadership staying present and grounded, and then also scaling. The other example is a very small one that I'll share, which was it's not atypical for organizations to come to us and say, like, there's so much going on out there. How do we respond to it all? Our employees are expecting us to have something to say about every single thing, which we get, Mo and I get, even with our own company. And what we did with this organization in a moment of these uncertain times was develop sort of a decision-making and communication rubric for their executive team. So what are their values? How do their values correlate to how they might respond to any given sociopolitical event, internal event, and then craft some evergreen key messages that tie those two things together so that the organization knew what it would respond to, in what ways and when, but not all the time, because it wouldn't be effective in the long run. So a couple of case studies. I hope that's helpful.
It definitely is. And I think I'm thinking of myself if I was that HR leader, which you've been. So you've been on both sides, right? So you understand the comfortable bondage that comes with the safety of not making a decision. To your point, there's so much coming at me, and I'm safer not making so much change, which now the paradigm shift goes into the various stakeholder expectations. There's not just one person making a decision anymore, and God forbid you make the wrong decision, your job could be on the line. And so how do you navigate that? Because when you're going in and you're dealing with, if I'm that HR officer, how do you deal with the conflicting stakeholder expectations when you're trying to get to outcomes and you've got so much to do, and where do you start? How do you navigate that?
I think that there's an error in the question.
Okay.
I love the question, Robert. It's not personal, but I wanted to.
Please clarify and qualify.
Well, okay. So here's what that question to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what it's essentially saying is that a leader has to be on the nose with their response to any given scenario that the employees have an expectation that a leader is going to respond to, and it needs to be right. That's what I hear in that question. And that's the part I'm challenging.
So I would say that you're correct in that the question in its premise might come off as it's a wrong question. It's really more of a state of being, not a
Yes.
reality, right?
Oh,
So
totally. I'm just doing that for sizzle factor, Robert.
yeah, no.
but
because
I only,
it is, right? It's
yeah.
your point. When you're a leader, you have to make decisions.
You
They're
can't,
not always going to be right, and it's a lonely
Yeah.
place,
it's
right?
so lonely.
Yeah, so that's the freedom.
Totally. And that's why I want to just laser in on that point, because I cannot tell you how often Fran and I are walking people off the ledge to merely say, it's okay to be wrong.
Yep.
Now, it's okay to be wrong when you've done the legwork of creating a trusting environment in your organization.
Yes, thank you.
And a lot of leaders aren't spending the time doing that because they are worried about their business. So we don't turn to our employees and do the legwork that we would do with any human we cared about. And in loving relationships and caring relationships, well, all I'm doing is putting some investment in here to say, I'm here for you. I'm here for myself, but I'm also here for you. And I think when leaders do that legwork, then what a leader gets to do, instead of feeling like I have to have the perfect response to this sociopolitical moment, I have to have the perfect response of what are we going to deprioritize as an organization or completely sunset because we need cash runway. All of these things. If I do the legwork of creating trust, psychological safety, then guess what I get to do? I get to be vulnerable. Now, some leaders hear that and they're like, no, I don't want to be vulnerable. But what vulnerability does, it's a gift. What vulnerability does is it gives you a permission for nuance. So here's the difference. I can get in front of the organization. I can say, we're going to make the following cuts. And if we're going to make the following cuts, I think that this is the right choice for insert sound rationale. I'm going to find out I'm wrong and I've done none of the legwork of creating psychological safety, trust, all of the things that help us be bought in to an organization, bought in to our leadership. Guess what? If you're wrong, expect turnover, right? It's very different if I come to you, I have created an environment where our leaders care. We all get to show up as humans, which means I'm going to try my best. I'll bust my ass for you. And I'm going to get it wrong sometimes. But that is the cultural expectation I've created in the organization. We're going to bust our ass and we'll be a little wrong sometimes, and that's all right. But we're going to
what happens if I am that leader and that is my live experience. But now, again, getting back to the conflict with the stakeholders, because I'm dealing with stakeholders that even the leaders have biases, right? Either it's a bias or it's a reality of what the other stakeholders are. How do I navigate that?
Yeah, naming all of this is my point. My point is to say, as a leader, you're sitting at the top of the house. I've put my investments in to this place, to these humans. The first thing I would say is none of us know the answer. None of us know the answer. And hopefully, if I'm a good leader, I didn't create these decisions alone. I have informed decisions where I am the final decision maker, but I'm reaching out to this collective for us to kind of take our best hedge bet on what the right decision is. But what I get to say is, I don't know. And you're not going to say that, right? You're going to say, I believe in us.
Yeah.
And I've done the following process to surmise this is the call. And I might be wrong. And if I am wrong, we have work to do.
Okay,
There is a really implicit thing that leaders are doing, and it is lonely because we choose to be lonely. We choose to say, I make the call. We choose to say, I die on the sword. All I'm saying is that there's a reframe that is super, super important, I think, for organizations, but frankly, the world right now, which is individually, we will not survive. So stop. I have a coaching client, an executive who my observation of them is, oh, this is stressful for you. You have to identify every problem and you have to have every solution that answers that problem perfect. That's impossible. So when are you going to give yourself permission to make your I problems we problems? And what's the kind of legwork you're doing to create that dynamic? We is the answer here. We is the answer to the future. It is not an I thing. And this is the kind of leadership stuff I'm seeing at the top that I think is kind of quietly flowing into our psyche of me. And it's very much we right now. This is why I've just kind of challenged that construct, because I think you are asking the question in the same way most leaders come to us with the question. And I'm really dead set on changing this dynamic of what leadership looks like fundamentally into a collectivist kind of emergent strategy. There's a woman, Adrienne Marie Brown, who talks about emergent strategy. And what her whole premise is strategy emerges in this iterative way. It is not this thing that you like create and it's perfect and you just, no, a whole bunch of we gets to have a constantly iterative emerging strategy that helps us move through this world. That is kind of the invitation I think that this moment is bringing leaders to.
Can you go back to the example you were just talking about? And like you said, it's iterative, so there's mistakes along the way. I think what's helpful for those listening is they see themselves in those mistakes, right? So what are those common mistakes that you might see so that, the people that are on the other end might be able to proactively avoid those?
Yeah, I didn't want to give you guys another case study because I thought friends were so great. But the one that I had, the one that was on my mind is we were working with, we have a lot of healthcare clients. And it's life sciences healthcare. This particular client had a therapy on the development pipeline. There was an adverse event in a clinical trial. That development could no longer happen. There's a whole therapy that this business was kind of depending on that kind of disappeared. They have other medicines. The company won't disappear, but there's this massive shift. Half the leadership team could look at it and say, it's time to pivot like right now, or we're going to be in bad shape. The CEO, who's also a founder CEO, it's their baby. He's not ready to kind of let this thing go. He is looking at what can we salvage of this while burning through cash. So we've got a CHRO who's panicked, a CFO who's panicked, and a CEO's like, we can do this, y'all. And so this kind of tension, they're all individuals who are coming to me in isolated ways. They're not talking to each other about this. They're talking to me. And so what do you do from this point? Well, in some ways, what the organization is experiencing is a stalemate, because there was no communication at this juncture to employees about what we're going to do, because they don't all agree as a C-suite. And they were kind of looking at the scientific reasons that we were having a stalemate. And I said, I'll just be real with you. This is a human problem. The humans are the issue here. Wherever we land is where we land, but it will be well informed, and you are all very smart people. You all don't want to speak directly to the tension that's sitting in this space. And by the way, this was always their behavior. They are triangulators.
Yeah.
And so what we did was say, great, you all know individually that this behavior isn't healthy. To your point, Robert, we all know this isn't the way to go, but we're still kind of doing it every day. And so what do you do? And so what we did was we sent them on we had a offsite where it's like, you need to get away. This group needs to go somewhere else and sit in a space and make a call together on where the business goes after this massive blow. And what we need to do before we even come into that space is we're going to do a diagnostic to talk about how well do you all, how deeply do you trust each other? How well do you engage in healthy conflict? How accountable do you feel to the work that you're doing on the day-to-day? How do you measure results? All of this matters. Let's assess that. Everyone answer these questions and give us a temperature check on how well we do on all of this. And the first thing we did when we brought them away from the day-to-day, this team, was reflect back these results. Well, there's no surprise. They're awful at conflict, avoidant completely, and they don't really trust each other. You see some pockets, but they're alliances. This organization will continue to have development problems. All right, it's not the therapy that's the issue, it's the humans. And so really bringing everyone together and saying, we, Goodworks, have some indications on new behaviors that will set you all up for success in perpetuity. And it's about decision making, and it's about investing in the long game of how you build trust, how you engage in healthy conflict, and how you make decisions and you're comfortable with the risk. There needs to be a rhythm, a system to all of that sequence. So let's spend our time on that. And we walked out of that time with them being able to be much more vulnerable and transparent about, I don't know some of this. And that was the problem. They didn't want to talk to each other because they don't want to share what they don't know. Leaders get very tight around feeling like they have to be the authority on everything, but you're not. You kind of need that other person to figure out the way forward. So they walked out of that offsite with a different way of creating emergent strategy. They would have never done that before.
Yeah. It's, as you said, it's an iterative process, but that intersection of iterative and sustainability sometimes can seem like a conflict if you're a decision maker. So how do you navigate that? Because it's one thing to acknowledge, right? To go through the iterative process.
Yes.
Another thing when it's constantly looking different every single day to get sustainability with the thing you're trying to make change around.
Fran and I are dealing with this question ourselves, I think, in some way. Please.
I mean, I think that, and what Monique did with this client, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is not my client, but my understanding and what we do with other clients is you set up process to support an agile process to support keep coming back to one another and keep coming back to the challenge. So, I think it's true what Monique is saying about this we framework. We just had a discussion with, his name is Dr. Henry Ton. He's a psychiatrist. He's the Vice Chancellor of Health, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at University of California, Davis. And he was saying that the human condition has us in moments of scarcity start to look out for the eye, start to exhibit protective behaviors. And so I think that that's really in line with what Monique is sharing, and our the HR leader. I hate to put this remit on some of the listeners from a human resources standpoint, but I see the HR leader's role as breaking that down, so that the executive team sees themselves as not preserving, and not in a place of self-preservation, not in a place of resource preservation, but in a place of how do we all care for this, the well-functioning of this group. And then frankly, I'll use a meditation metaphor, which is for anyone that has a meditation practice. One way of doing that is by paying close attention to your breath, non-judgmental attention to your breath. I think that the agile act of coming back to your breath, no matter how far away you come from it, but returning to it and knowing that you're always going to return to it, is the type of agile process that we try to set up with executive teams. So that sort of those three leaders that Monique was mentioning, yes, we can go on a 2-week or we can go on a 2-day retreat or what have you to get right about this topic. But what does it mean to, when we get distant, remind ourselves that we need to come back? What are the specific agenda interventions with our executive team meeting, with our board, with our employee meetings, our stand-ups, to come back to this strategic purpose, tying it to the organization's purpose, so that, to your point about sustainability, it does shift. It has to shift right now, because the economy, we're filming this March 13th of 2025. The predictions for the economy for March 13th, 2025 that were made in November of 2024 were vastly different than what we're experiencing today. And so that will continue to happen. And so if you don't have this practice of returning to your strategic vision and shifting, you have to shift. So that's what we try to do, sustainable process to help supporting this act of coming back to center.
Yeah.
Fran, the one thing I will say is I'm just thinking about our HR leader hat and this idea of like sustainability and chaos, and how do you got to sell this to your CEO. You have to sell these ideas. And I'm like, well, okay, now what would be my sell? And I think my sell is, I'm not going to sell you on, it's rare I'll sell somebody on something. What I want to do is be an inquiry with you on what's the best outcome we need out of the situation. And so what I would say to a HR leader in a case like this, where the tension is scarce, the perception or reality of scarcity and chaos, and you're trying to create some semblance of sustainability, I would go straight to my CEO and say, hey, let's repurpose this one-on-one. I actually want to show you a few things. And I would create the business case that says, if we don't make different choices, I think the following things are at risk. What do you think is at risk if we continue to stay in this pattern? Because I think what is happening to people is we're addressing immediate concerns. I just need to get to tomorrow. And so it feels like we're doing the right thing because we're surviving, but it's very anti-sustainability, because in some ways you kind of need to step up and look at the long game and say, what's the smart play here? It is very hard to get a CEO who has a runway that is this short and their competing priorities. What's at risk, Mr. or Mrs. CEO?
Yeah.
Are they, them? What's at risk here? And let's have that conversation. I will challenge you on probing on, is that the only thing that's at risk? Because here's what I see. And help me understand why you don't see that.
And maybe that's a good transition. It goes way too quickly. This has been an awesome.
Oh my gosh, it sure did.
I know it's an awesome conversation, but I think that is a great transition to wrap it up. And maybe whichever one of you wants to take a stab at this first, but I know you probably hate it when someone says, hey, what's the one piece of advice, right? Because there's so much. In this day, if you're walking into an organization, you can be all things to all people, or you can say, hey, here's the problem. Here's how I would suggest going forward. Let's just solve this one thing. What is the most common theme you would say to say, hey, this is what I would give with one piece of counsel that can help you to be more sustainable, profitable, and have better outcomes in this rapid pace of change?
Robert, one. That's so hard.
All right, take away one. Forget number one. Bad question, Monique.
No.
Bad questions all over.
It's an excellent
What's your advice?
So difficult.
I will. I've sort of made mention of this throughout our chat together today, but I think but not in these words. I would say trust yourself. I mentioned earlier that what you knew to be true about what we have learned about the functioning of people in organizations, what you knew to be true about that 9 months ago, 12 months ago, is still true. People are questioning it, but the science doesn't back it. Your experience doesn't back it. And so I would say, if you know the interventions that you know work, that's your job right now, is to stay close to those.
Brilliant.
I'm going to do my best, Robert. So the subject we're talking about is values to value. Monetary value is what I would how do you take the behaviors and kind of create business sustainability?
Yes.
If that is the question, the fundamental question, I think my advice would be, a CHRO or a head of people, your job, you have to be so crystal clear on what your job is in this moment. And I think clarifying what your role is very, very important in this moment. And I would argue your job is to marry up head and heart. What is the data that tells you what's best for this business? And what are the things, to your point, Fran, you know, you've been in this role for a long time. You've seen the anecdotal things, that the interventions, the programs, the policies that work, but you need to merge the data of the reality of the moment with a little bit of what Fran is saying and convince your CEO to have this conversation about what's at risk if we don't step back and think about our people strategically. I have a feeling a lot of people aren't getting the space with their CEOs for this conversation, but it is so important in this moment.
Yeah, I think standing on principle with grace and authenticity is imperative if it really is employees. And it's not about you trying to keep your job, because look, if that's the case, you'll lose your job. Yeah, right. So it takes courage to stand up and do what's right. And to both of your points, I mean, I don't, you articulated it perfectly. I wouldn't try to recapture that. I'm so grateful for both of you. I'm so grateful for the work that Goodworks is doing. It's much needed out there in the marketplace. We appreciate you as a partner. We appreciate the tenacity and the dedication and the commitment and the fortitude it takes to do the work that you do, married always with that empathy, kindness, and grace. And so that's a special talent and gift. And I just, from the bottom of my heart, want to say thank you so much on behalf of Connex. Thank you for your time today. And I'm excited to see those next chapters and journeys grow with you. So thank you. I appreciate it.